Hi, everyone. Welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe I'll just give a final 1 minute so everyone settles in. Thank you so much for joining us. This is really very exciting. I think we're at least 20 people, so I think we can start. Welcome once again to our session on Capital for Climate, Women Leading the Green and Blue Revolution, brought to you, of course, by Impact Investment Exchange. My name is Yasmin Larasati, your host and moderator for today, and I'm really thrilled to kick off this special session in celebration, of course, of International Women's Month, with International Women's Day just around the corner happening tomorrow. It's really a timely opportunity, I think, to recognize the role of women in advancing a sustainable future for the people and the planet. I really want to highlight that today is more than just a celebration. I think importantly, it's about action. So I think I really want to preface our session today by recognizing that as a global community, we're at an interesting moment in history, I should say. While we've undoubtedly made tremendous progress since the birth of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2012, we're also seeing pushback against progress, from shifting political landscapes to renewed debates over inclusion and sustainability. As a global community, we've been forced to grapple with the possibility that hard-won gains for women and underserved communities may be at risk. So I think what better time to spotlight the ultimate multiplier of the Sustainable Development Goals, women. Whether we're talking about SDG 8 for economic growth, SDG 13 for climate action, SDG 14 for life below water, gender equality, SDG 5 is key to unlocking all 17 SDGs. At IIX, our fundamental belief is clear. There is no climate action, no thriving economies, no healthy oceans without women at the center. So I also just want to start by saying that we remain as committed as ever, if not more, to building inclusive capital markets to empower women and underserved communities as agents of climate action. And that's exactly why we are here today. Over the next hour, we will highlight how women are already at the backbone of thriving green and blue economies, and to share insights from IIX's work at the nexus of gender and climate finance. This conversation serves as a vital first step in reimagining the role of capital markets, not as passive bystanders, but really as active catalysts and financing for a more inclusive, sustainable future where women drive the green and blue economies forward. As we let more people trickle in into the waiting room and into the chats, I can see that we're already joined by such a diverse group of audience today. As I said, today is an important and timely conversation. So, very thrilled to be joined by public and private sector actors from across the globe. I do see participants joining us from the US, Singapore, Bangladesh, Germany, the Netherlands, India, Vietnam, and wow, even New Zealand. So fabulous. Very, very excited to have all of you. And also fantastic to have fellow market leaders in the audience joining us. I can see, and a big hello to our fellow colleagues at Triple Jump, Blue Orchard, GIZ, Incofin, Allianz, MetLife, ICWater.org, UNDP, and many, many more. So, wow, thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this conversation. I think I've given us enough preface. So, without further ado, let me just quickly walk you through how today's session will unfold. This will be a fully interactive Q&A session where we'd really love to see a lively dialogue between all of the ecosystem actors present here today. We want to hear from you, so please drop your thoughts, comments, questions, discussion points in the live chat option, which I will be monitoring in real time, and I'll bring them into the conversation as we go along. To match the diversity of our audience, I'm excited to be joined by an equally diverse panel from the IIX team. Well, I myself am based in Indonesia, But I have with me my fellow colleagues, Jonathan joining us from Sri Lanka, Richa dialing in from India, and George, who sits in our headquarters in Singapore. Hi, everyone. Welcome. How are you all today?
Yeah, well, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us.
Great. Thank you so much for joining. I will start by putting our panelists on the spot and have each of them briefly introduce themselves and share a bit about their work at IIX. So, we actually do have and have received some excellent questions ahead of time from some of our audience members. So, thank you so much for those of you who have submitted those. Maybe what I can do is go to those questions in between waiting for some more to come in from the live audience. And as we move through the sessions, I'll just keep an eye out on the chat as well and bring in everyone's kind of thoughts into the conversation. So maybe I'll start with Jonathan and then over to George and Richa for a quick round of introductions.
Thank you, Yasmin. Good morning and good afternoon to all our audiences. So I'm Jonathan. So I lead the Impact Partners team, also known as the Transaction Advisory Unit at IIX, also the investment banking arm. So we have been in the market for, as Jasmine said, as long as IIX has been a part. We've channeled over 225 million in dollars in capital through our platform. We are not a typical crowdfunding platform, but actually a private placement platform. Where we actually directly connect deals to investors across the globe. So we have over 1,100 plus investors, and we work with a lot of partners who are already here with us today during the session, like UNDB, UNEP, CAPRED, the Australian government, to name a few. So very excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation today. Over to George.
Thank you very much, Jonathan and Yasmin, and thank you everyone for joining today. So my name is George. I'm Vice President in the Innovative Finance team at IIX. Our team really focuses in two main streams in the company. So one is our award-winning Women's Livelihood Bond series, which is really empowering millions of women across emerging economies in Southeast Asia and Africa as well. We're really building out the capabilities and communities to build economic security, but increasingly look at climate resilience and adaptation as key areas that we want to pursue. In addition to that, I also collaborate with other issuers of orange bonds. So we're really looking at actually developing a sustainable debt asset class that simultaneously will invest in gender equality, but also look at climate action too. So we look at advisory services across structuring, impact measurement and verification areas, and labeling too. So really looking at both social and environmental impact, working with issuers across Indonesia, Bangladesh, but as far as field as Japan and the US as well. So glad to be here today and looking forward to the conversation. Over to you, Richa.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Richa. As Yasmin mentioned, I'm based out of India. I'm a Senior Vice President with IIX, and I lead the strategy team and CEO's office, so working very closely with our CEO and founder, Professor Shanaz. While my colleagues here, Jonathan and George, focus on what we say is the asset vertical in the company, my job is more horizontal in ensuring that we have the right infrastructure in place, the right ecosystem to really absorb and mobilize our assets effectively, which is, of course, all-encompassing in a way, but focusing on building country engagement, strategic partnerships, our data and tech infrastructure, and anything and everything to ensure that we're headed in the right direction and deepen our presence across markets and target the ambitious impact numbers that we have in place. But thank you so much for having me, and very happy International Women's Month to everyone.
Great. Thank you, Richa, Jonathan, and George. It's really great to be joined by all three of you today. I think I'm particularly excited because each of you represent different verticals within IIX, as you've mentioned, and does really encompass the different ways IIX supports the ecosystem. Jonathan, as you said, focusing on direct investments. George, of course, works with our debt instruments, and Richa oversees innovation and ecosystem readiness. Each of these, I think, really uniquely instrumental in supporting both green and blue economies. So I think I want to start with Jonathan as we also maybe provide some opening discussions to give material for our live audience to chime in on. I want to go back and highlight the number of investors and enterprises that you worked with, especially given, I think, there's this huge misconception or concern that projects that target both gender equality and climate or marine restoration are really difficult to find. Some people may see no overlap, believing that, women's empowerment projects are separate from those focusing on climate action. But you work with over, what was it, 1,300 investors and 900 enterprises listed on Impact Partners, a big chunk of which I understand are in green and blue sectors. And of course, as part of IIX's investment mandate, these enterprises would have to demonstrate some level of benefit to women and underserved communities. So, simple question. How do you make that work? Can you share with us an example of a project or an enterprise that successfully integrates both orange and green or orange and blue?
Sure, thanks, Yasmin. Great question. So in terms of impact partners, I would say our forte lies in our team being very regional or having our boots on the ground.
Mm,
So we tend to have lots of companies, etc., who doesn't have on-ground presence, but when it comes to IIX, we actually have on-ground presence in most of the regions like Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines. So because of that, we are actually able to go deep into these countries and identify the real enterprises who actually are at the intersection of both climate and also women. So we also able to find that these enterprises are not just faking it, but actually are enterprises who's actually doing the good work on ground. So that way we are able to find enterprises who what investors really want and also who are at the same space. So I think having deep roots on ground has enabled us
mm,
to basically identify good enterprises who are
yeah.
making a great impact in terms of both climate and in terms of women as well. And in the same sphere, as I mentioned, because we have great pipeline and we have boots on the ground in terms of the country, there are lots of investors who are looking at this space, who are looking at credible deals. So if you look at the
Mm,
global macroeconomic aspects now, investor world is not that great at the moment because it's very jittery. Rates are going down. People are looking at much more greater deals. So because we have on-site insights in ground, a lot of investors actually reach out to us for on-ground insights, like in terms of macro plus a micro aspect, right?
mm,
So because of that is one of our key credibilities which enable us to convert with a lot of investors and have a large database of investors who trust on our sensors because we have boots on the ground. So I would say in terms of enterprises, the enablement has been we having boots on the ground and knowing lots of local chambers, local partners, having those deep connections. With investors, of course, it's because of our great insights on ground, on having a great micro and a macro aspect in terms of the country. So we are working with a lot of development partners on ground, like in Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia. So because of these insights, and we also consider like the country parameters as well. Like example, in Indonesia, when we are working, we were looking at sectors which contribute to both SDGs and the NDGs in the country. So looking at both actually allowed us to connect directly with the government, some of the chambers, and contribute to their agenda as well. Not only looking towards ours as well, but or looking at wholly at a country as a whole. So that has enabled us to find great enterprises and also bring in investors to sectors which the country is actually pushing towards. So because of that, we having the right mix between both the angles has
mm.
actually enabled us to find great investors and a great pipeline of investors, and at the same time find SMEs who are actually being supported by the local agendas as well.
Great. That's really great. Just to give maybe more color or visual, can you share maybe an example of a sector or a particular enterprise that you've enjoyed working with that does work in that intersection of green and orange? I think it's good to give the audience
Yeah,
maybe
sure.
a
So
sneak
I
peek of what
won't
that looks
name the enterprise for
like. Mm,
confidentiality purposes,
yeah.
but I would say in Vietnam, how we worked in terms of bringing capital to some of the countries, which lots of people think it's very hard to bring capital into markets like Vietnam. So if you don't know, like in Vietnam, there's a lending cap, like you cannot borrow more than 7%, which is set by the central bank. So we
Mm,
were able to work with this enterprise who were working with this women's alliance in the highlands in Vietnam, and we were able to bring a blended finance instrument simply because they were working with ethnic minority communities, creating association for them, and basically empowering them, not just providing them basic training, but actually providing them safety equipment, all of that. Basically, enabling them to do better and training them and get the rainforest alliances and all of that. So what we were able to get channel capital to them because simply because they were empowering women and they were also using natural capital sources. So example, in terms of
right.
coffee, they were
Yeah.
also planting macadamia parallelly, which was also providing shade cropping, which was
Mm,
also natural farming practices. And some of the coffee plants which they were basically breeding was actually also which had the coffee beans at the end of the tree, which actually enable the women farmers to pluck them easily rather than going inside the tree, you know.
yeah.
So, I mean, the company really think on both climate aspect and also from a social aspect, enable them to, really tap into lots of pools of capital, which is both social and environmental. So because of that, they were able to get a funding facility, which also enabled them to bring their cost of financing down. So if they were typically getting a loan from any lender, it would be around 8%, 9% when the so far was about 5.5%, 6%. But because they were making impact, they were able to get a grant along with the investment, which actually pulled the net cost of the transaction below 7%, which was accepted by the Vietnamese authorities. So transactions like that actually enables you to blend the transaction and reduce your cost of the transaction. And
Mm,
also it enables you to not only tap into one source of capital, you can
mm.
tap into a multiple pool of capital like social plus environmental angle. So you're basically widening your basket when you look at the both social and the environmental angle. So
Brilliant. Yeah.
we as impact partners, we were able to advise in terms of structuring, plus in
Mhm.
terms of how the money flow happened, how to do the entire blended instrument and all of that.
Wow. Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And that was a very comprehensive, I think, country level case study. I'm sure the audience appreciated that. I know Vietnam is joining us as well, a few representatives from there. So very thrilled to have you on call. So I want to refer to some of our pre-submitted questions here. I think I can direct this particular one to Richa. I think it builds really nicely on Jonathan's point just now. But Richa, do you have any tips on how we can differentiate a gender and climate positive project or enterprise, especially as we transition into greener economies? What kind of metrics are missing to capture the real community focused and gendered impacts? So maybe share about how IEX fills those gaps as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Yasmin. I think the solution to the problem was given by Jonathan. Let me actually detail out the problem and why this exists now, right? I think one of the biggest challenges we are facing in transitioning to greener economies and channelizing capital is really ensuring that gender and community impact does not get overlooked. And often, and in many, many rooms that I've been in, whenever we talk about climate finance, we're focusing on emissions reductions, on energy efficiency, and of course, very, very important metrics. But the S in ESG, the social impact, is continues to be, I think, difficult to measure, difficult to, or is deprioritized, right? It's even if it's measured, it's just not spoken about. I think that the direct and indirect effect of climate projects on women as well as the larger communities can be significant. And clearly, in Jonathan's example, can also lead to significant financial returns, open up markets. But they're very rarely captured in traditional disclosures, traditional climate disclosures, for instance, right? A lot of instances, I think there are self-assessments. They definitely are useful, but then the question really arises in terms of accountability and transparency, right? And most importantly, I think gender and climate positivity aren't checkboxes. They
Mm,
are actual commitments that require data, require verification, and requires incentivizing those who are contributing to this, right? So at IIX, this is how we tackle it. I love 3 points. I will share this in 3 ways in which we do this in IIX. First, I think quantification. We have a digital impact assessment platform called IIX Values, where we apply weighted impact scoring algorithms that can track enterprises' gender as well as climate performance. We don't just look at isolated indicators, but we're really assessing how these enterprises are performing, versus benchmarks of other enterprises at a sector level, at a community level, at a country level as well, right? And these are very detailed and nuanced evaluations. And by the way, in case anyone wants to take a look at these benchmarks are also available online, sanitized sort of comparisons at a country sector level, in case you're evaluating any of your investees or you're evaluating sectors. The second that we do after quantification, the second important point is verification. Very, very important. Real impact is just, again, not just reporting numbers, whether it's assessed or audited. It's also about what these women and communities feel and experience as beneficiaries of these impact, right? So our verification process actually brings the voice of the last mile to the forefront. Whether it's about the enterprise's impact in terms of products, in terms of supply chains, in terms of fair wages, workplace practices, right? What is it that the enterprise is doing to contribute towards improving lives, livelihoods, the environment in a broader sense as well, right? And this really brings that ground up and sort of matches that top down and bottom up validation of impact, right? Third, what we do is progress, reporting progress and incentives. I think measuring impact is only useful if it leads to action, right? Again, drawing from Jonathan's example of how the measurement of impact was able to unlock several opportunities. This is why we really reward enterprises making progress, making real progress with the Orange Seal. Now, Orange Seal is a certification or a recognition of impact, and it really helps enterprises unlock access to markets, access to capital, access to consumers, and corporate value chains. It also helps, on the other hand, investors to make wise investment decisions, marrying credit as well as impact decision making in the process, right? And I think connecting that supply and demand, it really ensures that everyone is committed to gender and climate outcomes. So we're doing this, and we've seen several successful examples at IIX. I think it's now, whether you're an investor, an enterprise looking to raise capital, or a key influencer in the broader financial ecosystem, the power of data, the power of transparency, the power of incentives is truly, truly remarkable. And we've seen that impact over time, right? So incorporating gender-focused impact measurement in your strategy is possible. The right metrics exist. It's just about using them the right way.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Richa. Really great takeaways for our peers here to tackle the challenges in identifying truly climate and gender smart enterprises and encouraging them to really deepen their impact. I think to be fair, I do want to go to George next. So we have a nice rotation happening. George, I mean, you've been really actively supporting with raising capital for the Women's Livelihood Bond Series for the past few years. And even, of course, in our upcoming issuance of WLB7 in this politically interesting environment, I will say. So I want to direct this next question from our pre-submission bank here to you. What have you found to be key drivers and challenges in attracting investors and attracting investor interest for the relatively nascent gender climate market?
Great, thank you very much, Yasmin. In our work on the WLB, we've been able to really attract a number of different public sector investors, but also private sector investors from across individuals, high net worth individuals, to family offices, up to your large institutional investors such as Naveen, APG, MetLife, PayPal. United Financial Services, to name a few. And we've really been able to scale up our bonds because of that interest. And I think previously, whereas the key question might have been around, can you invest sustainably and make a profit? We actually see often in our own work and a number of our peers that actually investing in women is not only the right thing to do for society, but actually presents a profitable and sustainable investment case. When you're dealing with in emerging markets and dealing at the community level, actually building out a climate angle in your work, quite often by empowering women, you can actually hit many other deep impact goals that resonate with investors. But really to attract such a diverse range of investors, there's a few elements we specifically look at in our products and our bonds. The first point is really looking at de-risking our investments through country and sector diversification. So our own bonds and our upcoming issuance is looking at countries across Southeast Asia, but also increasingly in Africa as well. This is actually where at IIX, we really work together as different teams, especially ourselves working closely with Jonathan and his team at Impact Partners, to see how we can support entities in their growth cycle and really get them up into securitized products such as our bonds. But actually, by providing that regional diversification, investors get comfort with actually having, within one instrument, be able to have actual ownership of assets in different countries as well. And so when we look at sectors too, I think that's actually where climate has become increasingly a part of our portfolio. Originally, we were really looking at financial institutions, so microfinance lending, SME lending as well, predominantly. But as we've scaled up the bonds, we've also been seeing since our WLB4, where we had around 30% of our proceeds going to climate action areas as well, that actually looking at areas such as sustainable agriculture, where you're looking at either sustainable agri lenders, but also actually sustainable producers where women are predominantly in those supply chains. You can actually have them as a part of this conversation as well. I think investors too are very interested in our work is this blended finance model. So really, we build out our credit protection elements with a guarantee on the loans as provided by the Swedish International Development Agency. But we also have a first loss layer that's developed by the Women's Catalyst Fund. So that's actually where we're blending public sector financing through different institutions with private sectors as well. So actually marrying the two enables us to scale our work into regions that perhaps typical investors wouldn't look at. So that's particularly interesting in Africa, where we're able to look at entities that perhaps are not the strongest credit cases, and actually be able to introduce those to investors and really get them thinking differently about impact too. But having that protection enables us to do that. And I think my last point just on some of the kind of things we look to is specifically actually around just transitions. I think this is actually an interesting area where we're seeing, where we're talking to a lot of institutions in Indonesia and particularly, and having women as a part of that just transition financing. I think this is where increasingly investors are looking to instruments that are transparently impacting communities, but also able to hit different elements of their impact agenda. So that's actually looking at how we can include women in a lot of those conversations, but perhaps in different ways, not just looking at ring fencing loans in financial institutions, not just looking at agricultural lending, but actually being able to look at infrastructure projects and seeing how you can impact women in different ways. I think that actually a lot of the time investors or issuers actually will be already looking at gender financing in a way is actually just looking at the educational and elements of that and building confidence in that. I think that's also leads itself to some of the challenges. I think actually building the educational elements around what is gender lens investing. I mean, that's why we created the Orange Movement in the first place, actually to create definitions around that and to work with different institutions, different issues of capital to see how we can impact women in different ways, and take different models to that. I think that's actually where leaning on, a lot of the data that we have and a lot of what our peers have, actually looking at trends in markets and emerging markets where there's not so much data, being able to pull that in and, actually be able to create innovative financial products on that. And my last and a challenge I'll touch on for our perspective, Yasmin, is really actually on the pipeline for investments. I think that's actually where, both I think all three of us here, our work really complements each other, because when you're looking at securitized products and the scale of loans that we're looking to make, we're looking at average loan sizes of 10 million USD or so, where a lot of borrowers in emerging markets are not able to take on that capital, right? And so we really need to build on each other's work, and I think that's where it's important to work as a team here and work in areas in climate action, to actually make sure that there's that technical assistance element to develop that pipeline, to get investors more engaged with that, because I think that is interest from an asset manager level, but a lot of the time it's actually providing products that are investable for them. There's a key issue in the industry.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, George, for those really firsthand insights, on what has been most crucial to keep in mind when attracting capital and investors for our unique and robust WLB series. That, of course, I'm sure some of these takeaways other investors, fund managers, issuers can also kind of resonate with. I also just want to quickly take the time to remind everyone to please engage, leave your comments. If you have any thoughts, questions, feedback on what our panelists have shared so far, if you had a contrasting experience, perhaps some pitfalls you'd like to share, a learning experience with, we'd love to hear from you as well. I will once again return to our pre-submission bank. I understand actually that during this session, there's quite a keen interest in learning more about regional trends in green, orange, blue intersections. I think Jonathan touched a little bit on earlier for a market like Vietnam, but maybe I'll go back to Jonathan again. I guess from all of the enterprises and ecosystem players you are working with, which geographies do you think demonstrate a positive and promising move to kind of a gender climate positive transformation?
Thanks. Great question, Yasmin, again. So I think in terms of Southeast Asia, I would say in terms of gender and climate, I think two economies which is moving towards that is Indonesia, of course, is at the forefront. Of course, there's lots of programs towards it. So Indonesia has lots of course, blue, green, there's lots of projects. I mean, if you could look at Central Java, there's lots of shrimp farming, etc. And then also in terms of organic cultivation as well. And at the same time, lots of them are working with a lot of women farmers. And same with Vietnam as well. So if you don't look at the metropolitan areas, but you look at the suburban areas, regional areas, like in terms of the mountain areas, etc., there'll be lots of ethnic minority communities working both on climate and also on the blue economy space as well. Of course, in certain countries, when you talk about blue economy, it's predominantly a area which is or a sector which is dominated by men. But I guess there are certain areas which women are having exposure to when it comes to blue economy, especially when it comes to seaweed farming. So I think in terms of countries in Asia, I would say Vietnam and Indonesia is coming up. And since we also have a very good presence in Africa, I would say a few countries which is also looking at gender and climate is also in Africa is also Nigeria and Rwanda, because both also have good aspects towards climate and women as well. In terms of, so we work with enterprise in Rwanda who is basically looking at renewable energy, storage, and it's 100% staffed by women. And we funded them last in 2023. So yeah, so I think it's growing, and I would say there's lots of opportunity. But of course, in South Asia as well, where I come from, of course, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka is always moving towards it. But I guess two leaders, I would say, in Asia is Vietnam and Indonesia. But Africa also, given the region, there's lots of opportunity as well.
Great. Well, not to be biased, I'm thrilled to have Indonesia top of your list there. And you mentioned Nigeria. I believe we have a few representatives who just joined us in the LinkedIn Live from Nigeria as well. So let us know if you have any comments or questions to Jonathan's feedback there. But that was really fantastic. And I think it's A great way to showcase that while historically, the conversation and discourse around impact investment has really been dominated by the global north, I think our work at IIX has really been able to showcase that there's impeccable leadership and sustainability here in Southeast Asia and Global South, all around. Um, Lots of really fantastic entrepreneurial landscape that marries, commercial viability, but also, businesses that produce incredibly positive impact, and especially who do that through having women very involved in their value chain. Whether you're looking at aquaculture, whether you're looking at waste management is a huge one in Indonesia. So I think, yeah, always fantastic to be able to remind everyone that, there's real leadership in Global South and fantastic models that we can learn from right here as well. I'm going to move on to the next question in my pre-bank submissions. Richa, I think this is an interesting question from our database. With the ongoing US climate and DEI policy reversals, how can we ensure that gender climate investments are resilient? Absolutely highly important question given our social political situation that all of us are kind of finding ourselves in the middle of right now, and its impact on, of course, climate and DEI policies, which affect many of our partners, whether they're contractors or fund managers. Richa, no pressure, but maybe you can share how some strategic or data-driven approach to investment decision making has helped us maybe push forward despite these changes.
I want to say interesting question, but but this is also going to put me a little bit on the spot. So I'm going to try and continue to be bold in my answer. So apologies in advance if anything is controversial, but I think but on a serious note, I think this is a very, very critical issue because any kind of policy shifts, right? And especially in major economies like US can and are actually creating a lot of uncertainty in climate and DEI focused investing. I think there's a lot of talk around this and significant impact that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks. But at IIX, we have and we will continue to take a long-term market-driven approach that ensures that there is resilience regardless of policy changes. I think it is a fact, we have witnessed this, that policy reversals are slowing momentum in countries in some aspects, but I still do want to put my stake in the ground and say that Asia is stepping up. And we are actually witnessing this. Countries like Singapore, like Indonesia, Bangladesh are proving that Global South is not waiting and we will not wait. We are leading. For instance, I think Jonathan George has spoken about our work in Africa, in Indonesia, in Vietnam. I think I can highlight another piece of work we're doing in Indonesia with the support of Ford Foundation, where we've conducted feasibility study, where we're working with enterprises to build a pipeline of Indonesia-focused ready enterprises and leading the effort on Orange Bond. And similar such projects in Cambodia, Philippines, in Bangladesh, so on and so forth. But I think we know that leadership is not just about ambition. It requires the right capital, the right infrastructure, the right kind of partnerships. And that is why IIX is committed and is deepening our focus in ensuring that gender and climate finance is not just an agenda. It continues to be an economic driver. I think if we talk about the DI backlash, one of the reasons is also that there's a myth that inclusive investing comes at a financial cost, and hence they are traditionally seen as riskier enterprises, right? At IIX, we have and we are proving otherwise. In the bond series that George mentioned some time back, the series has consistently delivered risk, return, impact, and measured. And it's only and only growing in size. He mentioned as to how we're attracting institutional investors for this, right? The demand for these bonds really proves that investing in women and climate, it's not just about the right thing to do or the ethical thing to do. It is about competitive advantage and actual tangible financial returns. On one hand, we're doing this ecosystem approach of galvanizing public as well as private sectors through innovative structures, de-risking the investments to ensure guaranteed financial returns. Now, coming to the SMEs, I think our investments focus on SMEs that really power economies, like the ready-made garment segment in Bangladesh. You mentioned about agriculture and aquaculture in Indonesia and several other such sectors. I think investing in women is, again, repeating what I said, but it's not just about impact and the right thing to do or the ethical thing to do. These are industries that cannot function without half the population, right? They can't function without women. It's not just about impact, it is really about ensuring that the survival and success of the economies continue, right? And hence, it's not just an outcome. I
Yeah.
do want to repeat this, gender is not just a secondary outcome of our investments. It is the driver or the lever in how we measure our return on investment, right?
Yeah.
It is not an afterthought. It is the actual basis for the decision making, what we do. I think coming back to your first point on policies, and I tried addressing some part of it. Policies are shifting, will continue to shift, possibly, hopefully not to the extent of how we're seeing today. But the fundamentals of gender and climate investing continue to remain strong. We've proven this. We've proven this with data, with multiple different case examples. Because I think that at the very foundation, it is rooted in economic opportunity, in mitigating risk, and in the market-driven value, right? In IIX, we will not wait for policies to align. We are building the right infrastructure. We are collecting, reporting, monitoring the right data, as well as building the right innovative investment models to make gender, climate, finance resilient, sustainable, scalable, future-proof, policy-proof. And that's how we will continue to move forward.
Well said, Richa. Fantastic. Wow. No, that was, yeah, I don't think anyone could have answered that any better. Thank you so much, Richa. You mentioned institutional investors. Great point, because we have a question from our LinkedIn Live audience, which is from Allianz Global Investors. The question is coming from their development finance and impact credit investment team. So fantastic. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Question is for Jonathan. Could Jonathan give some indication of the size of the transaction that he had mentioned earlier that he's been seeing in these regions? And also, are you kind of seeing mostly equity or debt financing that they're seeking? And then maybe after Jonathan, George, if you have anything to add as well, being investor relations is your forte. So I'll hand it over to Jonathan first, maybe.
Yep. Thanks, Yasmin, and thanks for that question from the Allianz team as well. So in terms of the ticket size, I would say enterprises are looking at somewhere around 500K to about 5 million. Of course, it could reach to about 9 million as well. Typically, I would say ticket sizes around of about single investment around 500K USD. And can go to about 5 million. Again, it's depends on the transaction and depends on the companies, but I would say 500K to 5 million is the sweet spot. In terms of, I guess this question was in terms of the instrument. I guess predominantly currently we are seeing a more movement towards the private credit side. So that means more towards the debt side as opposed to equity, simply because, again, as I mentioned previously, what's happening globally, the valuations are very low. Lots of negative sentiments as well. You might know, Yasmin, already in Indonesia, there's few hits. Of course, because of that, companies are having down valuations, so they don't want to, take out low value, like sell a huge part of their companies in simple terms for a low valuation. So because of that, they are looking at more debt in terms of to go navigate the current situation, and in terms of convertible note as well. So with open-ended valuation angle, so that they don't want to lock in any hard equity component. But I would say in terms of debt is more preferred currently with the investors who we are dealing with. But of course, saying that equity is not totally eliminated, there are certain projects as well, as long as there is a good IRR and stability concern. I guess there is appetite towards equity as well. But overall, we are seeing more towards the debt or convertible note side in terms of the instruments wise, both from an investor and an enterprise angle, but more from an investor's angle, we are seeing towards the debt side. But from the enterprise, of course, they would prefer equity as well. Of course, it's easy on their balance sheet and cash flows. But given the circumstances, we see most enterprises moving towards debt as well, because raising equity also has, it's tougher now, and the due diligences are also longer, and also they would also have a take valuation cut as well. Yeah. And maybe I'll hand over to George to emphasize more in case if he has.
Great, thank you very much, Jonathan. And just to build on what you're saying and to talk a little bit about our bond sizes and what we look to, our bonds we've been scaling up the last couple of years up to what we're aiming for currently is around $130 million in terms of bond size, but that'll be split up, to be, we're looking at around 14 or so enterprises in our upcoming bond. And the loan size will vary drastically. It really depends on the financial stability of the company, but also we do inherently look at the impact side as well. And I think and we also look at different sectors, right, and different countries. So really you have to use a blended approach and really look at the specific case-by-case basis and the capital needs of the organization. I think that's, on the one side, very, very interesting, where we're able to, and then again, thanks to the credit protection elements that we have, we're able to bring in, borrowers in clean energy sectors. We'll look at borrowers in water and sanitation, for example, where we can actually try and support women in really or almost kind of frontier emerging markets where perhaps that exposure will be smaller. But again, by actually onboarding them into the process of a structured product, they're able to develop not only their international exposure to investors, but also actually benefit from, as we were talking about earlier, about our own impact kind of verification and monitoring processes as well. We really work with borrowers to develop that angle. We see inherently that the more we talk to the women and these communities at the last mile, that actually we can tailor and innovate our products to actually have that impact at a community level. I think that's a really important angle for us ourselves to build out, but increasingly borrowers, I think, within our own bonds benefit a lot from speaking to those women as well and creating products for them.
Thank you so much, George and Jonathan. And thank you so much for the team at Allianz for that brilliant question. I think I just want to touch on quickly on what both Jonathan and George and Richard has said in the past. We're talking about politically interesting, turbulent, politically unsure, kind of global outlook. And I think in many ways, people will then translate that into, are these kind of investments kind of, are they seen as more riskier than usual? And I think we have a question from the bank here that's touching on risk. I think it's an important one for us to address in this conversation as well. I mean, George has said, that risk protection element for us at WLB as well, that's kind of very important. And if particularly kind of with IIX's approach of doing a risk impact return framework, I think I want to hear from all three of you. How do you find that help you better support, high impact enterprises, be it in the blue or green sectors, and also have women in the value chain? How do we correlate risk and impact, and has that kind of helped your work in working with enterprises? Maybe I'll start with George.
Sure, absolutely. No, thank you. And to talk a bit about that, that's really the approach we look at on our bonds, right? Is to mitigate risk maximize impact, but also to be able to give a reasonable return to investors. I think to actually, blend the three is always a very difficult job to do. But I think that by looking at it in this way, you're able to think about impact in a different way and be able to actually garner more investor interest as well, right? It depends a lot of the time on the situation. That's where investors perhaps will be looking at different products, but really we're looking at providing sustainable products at a profitable angle for investors. I think once we change that narrative, it's very much still necessary to have philanthropic capital and public sector capital in the investor space for sustainability. But I think the more we move that needle and change the conversation around, actually you can get a reasonable return as an investor and still actually be doing good, for society, but also environmentally. I think that will actually then see, when you start to see larger asset managers coming in and bigger capital going to these areas, that's where you'll see drastic change, the drastic change that we need to actually battle climate change and the like. I think at the moment, we're still at that stage of the risk mitigation element. I think that for a number of years there will still be that. But again, even within our own bonds, we've been looking at each year how we can play the guarantee up against the first loss, be actually innovating that idea and introducing again to these investors by showcasing and having a great track record in our bonds, that actually you can still be entering these markets in a relatively risk-free way. I think that again, once you start building out those narratives that you can still do it and you can actually have impact at a profitable scale, that's where you'll get the capital where it's needed most.
Yeah.
Jonathan, don't know whoever wants to move on next.
I mean, I think it actually has a lot to do with Rich's work with Orange Seal as well. I think I'd love for the audience to know how tools like the Orange Seal can help, change our perception of risk by leveraging impact.
Yeah. I think George spoke about blending different types of capital. I'll talk about blending different types of data and international standards, right? And every single dollar investment that flows through IIX or is enabled by IIX or even in the broader system where IIX is working with, right, has that impact linkage to it, right? I spoke about IIX Values earlier, the digital impact assessment platform that we use to really measure impact. I think what Values has done is solving the challenge of really lack of standardized measurement and multiple different frameworks. It's brought together, I think, multiple different industry standards as well as last mile verification, so that there's rigor in the data that we sort of collect and base our investment decision on. We're using IIX Values to really align our investment decision making, again, directly or indirectly, whether we're putting in money or enabled by IIX. And this deep impact data that's collected is utilized at every single stage, whether it's in the due diligence phase, it's in the continuous monitoring or reporting phase, right? And this last mile verification backed approach through IIX Values is what has helped us to mobilize more capital and attract new investors, keep our existing investors happy as well, who become our repeat investors in a way, right? We've seen that every single company we worked with, whether it's through the bonds, which George mentioned, or through our deal advisory platform, which Jonathan spoke about, all of these companies have gone through the impact assessment and are Orange Seal holders, really renewing, showcasing their impact as well as renewing it year on year in terms of gender equality and climate action. I think tools like this, certifications like Orange Seal are very, very powerful. And we've seen that sort of capital mobilization happen live. I think at the end of the day, the risk return and impact is not just about tracking. It's not just about reporting. It is about accountability it is about showcase and giving that voice to the enterprises as well. So that's how we do it at IIX.
Brilliant. I'm just conscious that we're nearing the end of our time. I don't mean to exclude you, Jonathan, but I might bring the live Q&A session to a close here. But if you still have more comments or questions, please feel free to drop them. Thank you so much for the incredible questions that you've been submitting through the live session or before. But to wrap up, I think what we can do is leave our audience with some practical takeaways. As we've highlighted today, orange is fundamental to driving progress in both green and blue initiatives. So I'd like to invite our panelists to share some actionable tips on how our audience can integrate orange or a gender lens into their existing green and blue portfolios or projects. Again, since our panelists represent different verticals at IIX, I think each of you can offer insights that can be applied to different stages of portfolio and project development. Jonathan, to be fair, I will have you start because I unfairly took away the opportunity for you to opine on that previous question. But maybe you can talk about how we can integrate gender equality early on in pipeline development. What are some key strategies or best practices for investors to identify enterprises whose business models combine green, orange, and blue? And then, George, maybe given your work overseeing our bonds, maybe you can share a bit more how gender equality can be reflected at a portfolio level for green, blue, or other sustainability linked instruments. I think that would be particularly fantastic for the fund managers and issuers in the audience. And then, of course, Richa, at a program level, maybe you can talk about how organizations can begin measuring and tracking the impact of their solution. So maybe I'll go over to Jonathan first.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Yasmin. So I would say, I mean, in terms of having gender at the forefront, it'll be quite easy if
Mm,
the founder is female, right? Like, so that's the easiest one. But I guess I would say that's the best route. But I
mm,
think I'll be very diplomatic and say refer to IX values because that gives numbers in terms of the entire value chain, like how many suppliers are there, how many customers are women, because that gives a really good picture in terms of how the organization actually impacts women and also on the climate side. Because that on the basic actually whenever you speak to any of our companies, all the companies actually have the IX values or the orange seal verification done, the basic one. So when you actually take a very short glimpse of it, that gives you all the factors in terms of how the company is doing in terms of gender and in terms of some climate. And of course, we are continuously doing improvements to see how other factors can come in as well, like in terms of how much of carbon credits are say, like carbon is offset. So these are also some of the factors which we are continuously improving on our impact platform, which investors can make not only a more gender inclusive decision, but also a more climate and environmental focused decision as well. So we actually have listened to the market. We've also worked hand in hand with some of the values team members as well in terms of giving some of the insights which some of the investors have asked us. Like previously, maybe 2 years ago, we didn't have certain number of impact metrics in our report, but now we have. So ensuring that actually allows the investors to have a good gauge even before even having a chat with the enterprise, right? So even when
yeah.
they'll visit our Impact Partners platform, they can see the value score. And then once they see the value score, they can see the gender angle and also the environmental angle. And then, of course, later on, if they want to go to detailed DD, they can, of course, go to ask them enterprise to do the verified impact verification, which is, I would say, the most cost-effective module
Mm,
out there in the market, where they can actually verify the impact at grassroots level from suppliers, customers, etc. So I think that's the best way forward, and our platform is fully integrated to make sure impact, return, and it's transcendent. So I think all of that is important. So I think IX, the Impact Partners platform, makes sure all three aspects of impact, return, risk, and also RRI is brought to the center of the conversation. So our platform basically is built on that module.
yeah.
So, yep. So I'll pause there.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And because you've mentioned values and seal, I have to maybe go to Richa next as a natural transition there.
I think very quickly, if for organizations who are looking at integrating orange into their green, blue, and other SDG decision making, it is going to be imperative to sort of track both qualitative as well as quantitative metrics and across value chains. Whether what Jonathan mentioned in leadership, whether it's in workforce equity, whether it's in your end consumer access, your community impact, climate impact. I think very, very important. This comes up in every single conversation with regards to impact investing on impact washing. But there is a lot of hard data evidence that we have in terms of the kind of financial returns backed by great impact and the magic that it can do. I think it'll be my dream when we start doing credit and impact assessments in the same breath without a second thought, without having to do it, but it's just by nature a decision-making process that happens. But yeah, I think let's bring that data and transparency and accountability to the forefront.
Yep. And any parting few words from you, George, there?
I'll won't say too much. I think both Jonathan and Richard said a lot. I think one thing, just at that portfolio level, and to think more broadly about impact and adding a gender lens onto your work is a lot of the time, when you actually get the data and look at it, you could be creating impact in ways that you don't know. It just takes a desire and a real look at how you're measuring that impact and what are those effects. And I think if we go away today and think about that, I think it's always great to talk, but to actually move into action. So, again, engage with organizations such as ourselves, always open for a discussion to build on those partnerships and to see how we can essentially mobilize more capital for impact, because I think for now, it's needed more now than ever. And so if the more the merrier in that element.
Great. Thank you so much. I think all in all, a very meaty takeaway for the audience to think about there. Thank you so much, Richa, Jonathan, and George, for being such brilliant panelists today. It's always so incredible to speak to all three of you. So it's been an incredible learning for me as well. And of course, a big thank you to our incredible audience for spending your Friday afternoon with us, for staying on the whole hour and engaging with us, and really just makes such an important conversation even more meaningful, right? But remember, I do have to say, dialogue is just the first step. There's still much more work to be done, and especially as we wake up to International Women's Day tomorrow. And if you'd like to learn more about the work we do at IIX and explore on how we can collaborate, please do feel free to reach out to us at the email you see on your screen there, which is our strategy team email. And Richa will be ready to attend to your queries. And if you haven't already, of course, we really do invite you to sign the Orange Pledge and really showcase your organization's commitment to supporting women, girls, and gender minorities in leading the charge towards global prosperity, enduring peace, and climate resilience. Plus, signatories will receive updates on all things orange, from events to RFPs. And you can sign the pledge by simply scanning the QR code you see on your screen there. Thank you once again. It's been really an honor to host you all today. We look forward to continuing this important journey together. Wishing you a powerful International Women's Month ahead and a fantastic weekend that we all, I'm sure, are looking forward to and deserve. So thank you, everyone. I'll log off now, but thank you for joining us. Thank you. I'll see you in our next session. Bye.
Thanks, Yasmin. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining.
Bye.